Hey guys, good evening. Sorry about running late. I was eating dinner, ate something crazy spicy, and had to wait for a cup of milk to arrive to be able to get started. But I am just about ready. I hope you guys have had a wonderful week. Hopefully you're all still safe and healthy. Doing okay here in Nashville. We're about to enter phase 3 of COVID quarantine, which I'm not super excited about because I feel like it's probably not a good idea to allow people to congregate at music venues again. But you know, I guess I can stop myself from doing it and just hope that the people around me won't do it either. So this evening we're going to be talking about skin tone with watercolor. It says stream health is yellow, not super great. So if I drop out, you guys are going to have to let me know. So in the description, you guys might notice that we have a couple of links. We have a link to the printable. Yeah, thank you. We have a link to the printable with these little heads on it. So if you want to paint along and you don't want to have to worry about drawing, you can either print it as a patron, patrons get it free, or you can pay $2 on Gumroad, download it and print it. Either way works. What I did for tonight is I printed it on Canson XL watercolor paper, a very inexpensive cellulose-based paper. Went ahead and penciled it, changed a few of the features. Originally, this was done for my Manga Madness class, which is really a class on teaching people how to break down the face and how to draw different types of faces. With kind of a manga aesthetic to it, since that's what I happen to like. So for tonight's demonstration, I wanted to give them just a little bit more personality. So we are going to be using Humane as the main reference for mixing skin tones, and yes, the stream will be available to view after. What I'm also planning on doing is recording the main meat of the tutorial as well in a shorter, more condensed version for people who don't want to, you know, watch 2 hours of me mixing paint. So I'm going to move this aside for right now. This is the main meat of the presentation, the main most important event, the Simba, if you will, but we're going to get to that in a little bit. And as always with any night where I'm dual recording, you're going to see a lot of my shirt. You're going to see me standing up a lot because I have that camera in the back. So the first thing I want to talk about tonight is just some of my favorite color mixes for different skin tones. And I know Maddie has some excellent mixes for skin tones as well. I don't have any Potter's Pink. I'd love to play with that a bit more, but I don't have any. What I do have are a few different Naples Yellow and Jaune Brilliant, as well as Antique White. And I also have 3 different palettes that we can kind of use as base mixing palettes. So we have the Daniel Smith Ultimate Mixing Palette, we have the Da Vinci palette, and then we have the Core Mini palette. And then of course, we have the old beater. We have my Daily Driver palette. This is what I use when I'm doing most of my watercolor painting. So you can see it looks pretty well used. No, not for the main demonstration. I'm probably just going to use my Daily Driver palette for the main. Oh wow, thank you. Doesn't even show up. Okay, for the main demonstration. But I did want to kind of talk about using some of these pre-assembled 12 color sets for general color mixing as like kind of the preamble, if that makes sense. use some watercolor scraps to help me out. Actually, what I could do is I could use same kind of paper we're going to be using later. It's a shame I have such a small work surface. What would be really nice is to be able to just like bring over trays, place them down, and then when I'm done, move them. And that would allow for much quicker transitions. Kind of don't realize how much setup things need until you're trying to do it live and you're like, why does it take so long? Okay, so I'm gonna show you guys some of kind of my basic de facto mixes, and then we can use Humane as a reference to create mixes. So a lot of artists will use Naples Yellow or Jaune Brilliant. I may have trouble getting the My Marie Blue one open. Got it, awesome. And what this is it's like a PW6, and then this one has iron oxide in it. So it's going to be kind of a pinkish white. I don't care for these kind of pre-mixed lighter skin tones myself because they tend to be very opaque. And I tend to paint way too many layers for them to really work out well for me. But for people who only use a couple of layers when they're painting, this can be a really good alternative to like mixing up a custom mix every time. And when I'm mixing skin tones, for the most part, I'm mixing for comics. So not necessarily like a realistic portrait, because like we'll take my face as an example, okay? Like you have areas where there's like gray and blue from like the bags under my eyes, or like, you know, red discoloration from like blemishes. If I were painting portraits, I would use a wider variety of colors than when I'm painting for comics. And then this is Jaune Brilliant number 2. Sure, I can do that. Actually, I got kind of distracted because we got kind of a late start. So there are some other things I do want to talk about before we get too deep into this. But I'll swatch these real quick and then we'll talk about that. And then this is kind of like a warm white, so it's antique white, buff titanium, like in the DS set. Would be kind of a similar analog color. And this can be used, you can see how much I use this. I've had this for 10 years and I barely use it all. This can be used to add some opacity, so you can make kind of something similar to these without, like, white gouache tends to trend very blue and very cool. So you can use a warmer color to mix in so that you maintain kind of the liveliness to the skin if you want a more opaque mixing skin tone. Hey, good evening, BJ. Okay, so we're gonna go back to skin tones in a little bit, but oh man, talking about skin tones, my camera thinks I am the color of the sun, very glowy orange.
Yeah, I noticed that.
Oh, don't know what that's about. It's been tripping out lately.
I mean, you can just turn it off if you don't like it. Figure it out some other time.
Yeah. So So before we get too deep into Skintones, I definitely want to talk about 7-inch Kara Volume 2. That is my long form watercolor comic. It's kind of where I cut my teeth on painting different skin tones. You can read the first 6 chapters for free at 7inchkara.com. We're going to be kickstarting Volume 2 in July, like mid-July-ish, around July 10th. And if you're interested in this project, which it would really mean a lot to me if you were, you can follow the project on Kickstarter. And are you dropping a link or should I drop a link? Thank you. If you're not sure if you're interested, I talk about a lot of the behind the scenes, day-to-day making the comic process. I've talked a lot about that over at natosuit.blogspot.com, as well as here is on YouTube, but I've also talked about it a lot in the Kara mailing list. And it's kind of like getting my blog in your mailbox at least once a week. And then, of course, the work that I do here on YouTube is not funded or sponsored by any art supply companies. It's all done by donations, and that's made possible thanks to the generosity of my wonderful art nerds on Patreon. We are currently working on revamping the paint box to be an even more useful art asset for fellow artists. And we're going to have some really cool perks in store for people who are art nerds. So if you like what I do and you want to help support and help continue me doing this, you can join me over at patreon.com/natosuit. And then, of course, if you like my art, if you think my art is cute, I have an Instagram, and just joining me over on Instagram and occasionally commenting on the stuff that I make really means a lot to me. So if you can't afford to support the work on Patreon, supporting it on Instagram just with likes and comments is a really nice pick-me-up, and it always means a lot to me when someone takes the time to write out a thoughtful comment. And then finally, for the main event tonight, this is what we're going to be using for our reference. So you guys can see we have a beautiful gamut of different skin tones. And I find that when I'm mixing something I can't just reference right in front of me for the first time, it's really helpful to have photo reference to mix from. So that's what I'm going to be using as the main bulk of the reference tonight. So let's talk about color mixes now, all right? I don't know why I'm being like really weird and screwy tonight, because I was really looking forward. What are you doing? Sorry, I'm having a secondary funicular-divicular problem. Let me see if I can fix that. Yeah, I got it. I don't know why I'm being kind of weird tonight, because I was really looking forward to the stream. Maybe that's why I was being kind of weird tonight. So, for basic, very pale skin tones, you guys can probably see how those PW6 included paints, like Argent Brilliant, which is, what are you? It has a cancer sticker on it, which is always exciting. PR108, PO20, and PW6. As well as our PW6 and iron oxide. You can see how much they kind of pollute the water, so we're going to have to switch our water out soon. But for some basic mixing, where I talk about some of my go-to mixes, we can use this. Not a big deal. Okay, so let's start with the Daniel Smith set. One of my favorite basic mixes is usually scarlet red with a little bit of yellow ochre for just kind of like a very basic sort of Caucasian skin tone. You can always add more of the alizarin crimson, sorry, scarlet, or more of the yellow ochre. You can always add burnt sienna just to kind of tweak it. But in this set, we have, I don't think this is a yellow ochre. I think it's what is it, Gouaches, which is like a French ochre. And then we have a Venetian red, which is a little bit opaque when it dries, and then I think an Indian red, and then finally I think it's their burnt umber, not their raw umber. So this set has some colors that already kind of lend themselves to skin tones just out of the gate. When I'm looking for skin tone colors, usually though, I'm looking for, because I do so many layers, I'm looking for not super opaque and also not granulating or very little granulation because I do so many layers. If you work with colors that are very granulating for skin tones and you work very small like I do when I'm painting comics, what it ends up looking like is it ends up looking like there's something, like they're sunburnt or their skin's cracking or their skin's peeling, like something like that. So for me, finding colors that are not too opaque, so they're not going to lift up as I'm doing layers, and they're not too sedimenting, so they're not going to look dirty or uneven as I'm applying the layers. So I think with this set, what I ended up doing, this is Quin Gold, because they don't have yellow ochre. So I mixed Quin Gold with the Goethite along with a little bit, maybe too much, Scarlet. And in full saturation, it is like how I looked a few minutes ago. Bright as the sun. But when you kind of blend it out, wash it out a little bit, desaturate it, it's not going to be as strong. Of course, this set works, I think, better for darker skin tones because we have a really lovely range of darker browns. So for that, if I were to do a quick mix, I would do, this is probably their burnt sienna. To me, it looks more like an Indian red, but it's probably because it's got more granulation than I'm used to. So when I'm mixing skin tones in general, I try to avoid single color mixes just because to me it starts looking kind of synthetic. Multicolor mixes start reading to me as a little bit more natural. Ooh, with Indian red as a base. Indian red is really pretty. I wonder what they're using in the Van Gogh to make it Naples yellow reddish without a PW6. So in the Core Mini palette, this one requires a little bit more mixing and the colors are really pretty saturated, but we have a really nice alizarin crimson, which can work really well as a beautiful sort of blush color for many different skin tones. And then we also have a Quin magenta that if you mix it with your lizard rim crimson, you end up getting like closer to a true red. But what I really like in this particular set is the Core burnt sienna, which is as day glow as I was earlier, but if you desaturate it out of the box, you get a very workable light skin tone that can always be saturated more to get darker skin tones. So with this set, if I wanted to start painting darker skin tones, I would mix the burnt umber that's next to it along with maybe a little bit of our alizarin crimson and our Quin magenta to get something that is a little warmer, so, you know, like so that you can tell the person has life in them. And not everyone has warm skin tones. I mean, you can have warm skin tones, you can have cooler skin tones, you can have yellow as kind of the base color of a skin tone, you can have more like a pink or an orange as kind of the base color. Some people even kind of have almost like a purplish undercolor to their skin, which is why I really recommend working from reference the first time you're mixing a skin tone that you've never mixed before. And then over here we have the Da Vinci set, and it has a traditional yellow ochre, and it has Da Vinci red, which is pretty close to scarlet. So this makes for like my typical lighter skin base. And then we also have a really nice burnt sienna in this set. Running out of room there. Which isn't as like highlighter orange as the core, so it's more flexible for skin tone, so it can also be blended out and used. And then we also have their burnt umber. So Da Vinci and core tend to be much more finely granulated. The pigment's particle sizes are much smaller than in the Daniel Smith set. So for me, it makes mixing skin tones a lot easier because we're not going to have like randomly different particle sizes. And then if you need to get much darker, this set isn't going to do it, because what you really want is you want to start adding in a little bit of maybe purple or a little bit of Payne's gray if you don't have like a sepia or like a Van Dyke brown. And you can see how the purple, you don't need a lot, but it darkens up the color without desaturating it too much. And you still get some of that red, whereas with the Payne's gray that I just grabbed, it darkens it up a lot, but it also can desaturate it. So I'm going to pull this out, and I'm going to talk a little bit about, I don't actually want to pull it out, but I'm going to talk about blush tones and shadow colors. For the main part of the demonstration, I'm probably not going to do that on stream just because it adds a significant amount of drying time, but I do want to talk about it. So, sorry, I'm trying to, could I try a mix of the cool red and the cool yellow? Yeah, of course. From the core. Thank you. So, okay, I'm going to go with the magenta. Sorry. Sorry, I went too magenta there probably. When I say reference, generally I mean, well, whatever you can get. If you can get a real person, that's great. But if you can't, photo reference, especially photo reference with good lighting is helpful too. The core set also has a Quin Gold as well as like Pyrrole Orange, which Pyrrole Orange is so orange. Let's see what we get if we mix like a little bit of the Quin Gold with the burnt sienna. It's part of the problem. Not that it's such a problem, but part of what makes it cheap mixing like this difficult is that these colors are really, really saturated and very finely milled. So you get this like really intense color. How would I create an olive skin tone? Whew. Not that it's not challenging. I'm looking at my two palettes and I'm like, no, I want to go with my Daily Driver. My nasty looking, gross cat hair infused Daily Driver palette, because I have a lot more colors that I use for skin tones in this palette because I paint so many people and because I paint a lot of comic pages. So let's see, an olive skin tone. Let me, so usually when people say olive skin tone, there's also like a yellowish undertone as well. So I'm going to grab the person I'm going to use as, it won't let me direct link the one I want. Okay, I can fix this. Hang on a sec. No, because no. What I need to do is I need to turn the virtual desktop on. So if I were mixing this kid's skin, I would probably go with a raw umber. And then warm it up a bit with, I don't know, I have this Quin red that could be interesting. So that's scarlet red. And to me, that's way more blue than the Quin red. And then I have like Holbein Cherry Red, which is another Quin red, but it trends more blue. And then I have Winsor Newton Alizarin Crimson, which is really blue, like compared, let's say, to the core Alizarin Crimson. I think it's more blue. And then also we have, that's Permanent Rose. This is, I'm grabbing the Da Vinci Alizarin Crimson. So that's a really blue one as well. So what I would probably do first is I would mix and try to find swatches. Like I would work towards that color because it's a skin tone I haven't mixed a lot. So I would need to practice and experiment first to kind of get there, which, you know, some people would say, oh, that's, you know, you're wasting paint doing that. But what's more important to me, like if this was a commission, I was painting a likeness, it's more important to me that I get that person's skin tone right than it is if I waste a little bit of paint. So I'm going to try the raw umber with the Quin red. And this is really watered down. So maybe that as a base. So with watercolor, right, you're building up your layers of color. And some people build it like 1,000 little bitty layers, and then some people build it in like 3 or 4 layers. It really depends on how you work. And then maybe that to start adding shadow to the skin. So for this kid, what I normally do is I will apply, sorry, that's on me, not on the kid. What I normally will do is I apply like my blush color, like on the cheeks, and on the lips, and maybe on the bridge of this kid's nose instead. And then above the eyes, and then maybe along the cheekbones. And then when that dries, actually this Quin Red here, as it's drying, it kind of makes a nice skin tone too. I would then go ahead and apply the skin, the skin tone on top of that, and then I would apply the shadow color that I want to use. And for this kid, maybe like Naphthalmide Maroon with a little bit of Dioxine Purple. That's way too saturated. Because all you want to do is add enough contrast and desaturate it enough that it looks like it's shadow. You don't want to, like neutral tint, some people will use that sometimes, and sometimes I will too if I'm doing like a very realistic watercolor portrait. But it can, when I'm doing comic pages, it can desaturate way too fast. And then some people will also use Payne's Gray, but you can see the neutral tint, and that's Winsor Newton neutral tint, but I usually prefer Holbein neutral tint. You can see that the Payne's Gray is way more blue than the neutral tint. So this, I would say, unless you're doing maybe like an evening scene or a night scene, this might be a shadow color that's too desaturating for certainly for use on like the face. Oh, I bet. I'm going to have to read it after because there's a lot of pigment talk, which means I'm going to have to look it up later. No, I'm glad you're being an art nerd. I appreciate it. Yeah, okay, so Maddie said, I think raw umber can make a nice base for olive skin tone since it's a yellow-based skin tone. Yeah, the other way I was thinking about it is I have a lot of different yellow ochres. And one could approach it depending on how they want to do it with a little bit of raw umber and a little bit of yellow ochre. But what, as you can see, my concern for this is as it is like that, it's too yellow. So I would need a little bit of something warm to like warm it up. You could even use burnt sienna probably. Yeah, just enough to, actually that's not bad. So that's a little bit of yellow ochre, a little bit of raw umber, and a little bit of burnt sienna, and it makes a really nice skin tone. So a lot of swatching to kind of figure out, okay, yeah, that works. No, that doesn't work. So, yeah, with Quin Rose / Magenta, it will take over your mix really fast. Wait, yes, I do have Jane's Gray. I have Jane's Gray in the DS set. And I think Jane's Gray is supposed to be a better mix. So it's more, sorry, it's more like the neutral tint. I think it's supposed to be a warmer mix. No problem. A lot of it, this is what makes it fun doing this for stream, because a lot of it is problem solving and approaching how I would solve certain paint problems, certain, like I'm looking and I'm trying to understand what colors are making up that skin tone, and then as I'm doing further layers on the face, as I'm trying to do the shadows on the face, do I want to move warmer? Like for someone with skin color like mine, I might want to move, when I'm mixing Caucasian skin tones, I will add more, like a lot more scarlet to the mix as it gets darker, right? But that, like when I'm mixing like Naomi's skin tone, when I'm mixing a much darker skin tone, then I start moving in towards Van Dyke Brown and Sepia. So this is M. Graham's burnt umber. It's a really, really nice brown for like building up darker skin tones. This is Winsor & Newton, I want to say. Their Van Dyke brown. It's like a really nice warm reddish brown. Ah, okay. Wait a minute. I thought, no, it's burnt umber and ultramarine would be Payne's, regular Payne's gray. And then that's Winsor & Newton sepia. So, I'm really big on having pre-mixed or convenience colors, especially in like earth tones and colors that can be useful for skin tones, because I don't mind mixing 3 colors to make a skin tone, but I don't really want to mix more than 3 colors to make a skin tone, because then it makes it more difficult for me to keep the proportions in my head, especially for a character that I'm painting over and over and over again. So Maddie said another interesting mix would be a red, kind of like a Pyrrole Scarlet or any other warm orangey red with a color in the hue of green earth, the cooler one. I don't think I have any green earth. So that's one of those, yeah, like if you guys have favorite mixes for skin tones, let me know. I'm always interested in learning and checking out new mixes. I think I got a Winsor & Newton green earth at one time because the swatch made it look kind of like a pastel green, but what it ended up being was a very sedimenting, very chalky, opaque green when I used it, and I was just like, I can't use this. So I think I may have even rehomed it. I never used it. But that's me. Like, that's another really nice thing I think about watercolor is every artist is going to have a very different palette. And what I like is going to be very different from what you like, and how I handle color is going to be different from how other artists handle color. So please don't take this as like when I tell you guys how I do these things, like that's just how I do these things. It's not the end all be all. And I like how this is supposed to come out, and it doesn't. This is Canson XL, and I grabbed this. It's a cheap paper. It's a cellulose paper. I grabbed it because the faces I printed out are also on Canson XL, and I'm a big fan of swatch on what you are going to paint on, or the same kind of paper. My big regret with this palette here is Grumbacher actually makes my favorite alizarin crimson. It's kind of like an orangey pinky alizarin crimson, and it is really, really good for blush. And what I have in here is Winsor & Newton alizarin crimson, which is not the same color by any stretch. Hey Carlo, good evening. I mean, I like yellow ochre for skin tone, for lighter skin tones. It has worked for me. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to make room, and I'm going to clean up, and I'm going to move some of these things off the table. I just wanted to demonstrate some skin tone mixing with different paint sets that are commonly available, since when people ask me like what paint should I get, I usually try to recommend a mixing set, so I know these are pretty common and they generally tend to be priced fairly affordably, at least in the US. But I'm going to use my Daily Driver palette, since that is what I am the most comfortable with. This giant Hulkin thing. And when I remember what brand something is, I'll tell you guys what it is. Wow, I gotta say, I really want a wireless lavalier mic, because this thing gets caught on everything, and I'm super afraid it's going to take the whole table down with it. if I were to, I mean, I'm going to move into that, but I might as well talk about that now. So, the hair color isn't necessarily going to matter, but I know what you're talking about. It's somebody whose skin is so pale, it's almost like blue underneath. So what I might do is I might take some yellow ochre and really water it down. And then I might go in with a cooler red. So like the Winsor Newton Alizarin Crimson is kind of a cooler red, so that we get almost that translucency. And then just add a lot of water. I mean, that's the cool thing about watercolor, is so much of, and keep in mind also that watercolor always dries lighter than it goes down. And then if I were painting black hair, depending on the nature of black hair, like some people have like a brownish black hair, some people have like almost a bluish black hair, I might start with like a neutral tint as the undercolor. And I think I have a warm black in here. But there's also cool, so I have Winsor Newton lamp black in here. And then layer that on top. So skin tone, first layer of hair, second layer of hair, like the darker layer of hair. Yeah, please do, Maddie. I appreciate it. I have Discord turned off just so that you guys don't hear like 10,000 beeps and boops. But I will definitely take a look at it once the stream is over. Yeah, I'm always interested in how other people mix their skin tones, because I am not at all pretending like this is the only way to do it. I'm just like showing y'all how I do it and how I think about doing it. Which it often becomes like a lot of trial and error until it's a character I've painted many, many times. I never make it into the garbage. Like this. Like that's the kind of skin tone. Oh, that is not gonna work. Joseph, do me a favor and let me know when it's been 10 minutes. Sorry, just trying to get everything, wow, cannot even. Trying to get everything kind of set back out again.
Carlo Bagnazco looks new.
I know, I said hi when...
Okay.
It's okay. All right, so regardless of people's skin tone or skin color, when I start painting, I will usually apply, it depends on kind of the illustration, but I usually will apply the shadows to the skin. No, back up, come on. Shadows to the eyes first, sorry. So I'm going to do that for everybody on this page. And for that, I'll just use a little bit of Sennelier's Ultramarine. And this hasn't been stretched, so the blue lines are actually still visible and they will reactivate. And that's okay with me. And what I want to do for this is I want to write down my mixes so it can be kind of like a quick mix cheat sheet, not only for myself but for other people who are looking for quick, cheap mixes. So a cheap way I make the eyes look more three-dimensional, like they're actual orbs in your face, is I will, and these are a little bit dark, but that's okay because if I were to go in and add white gouache highlights, that would actually stand out a little bit more. And they're also kind of dark because they're reactivating that non-photo blue. So I'll give that a chance to dry, and then I do like a half moon of the same color or maybe slightly darker at the tops of the eyes. So now we get to have the fun of watching paint dry.
You can't paint skin while the...
No. So the way I handle skin is, except for like the lightest skin tones, I always put a base color of the skin and then build up from there.
So you paint over the eyes as well?
But if it touches an area that's still wet, it's going to bleed out into it. What this will let me do, please? Yes! Awesome. Okay, so I can actually select some of these for reference and be able to come back to them later.
Did you want the hair dryer, or there's not going to be a lot of drying time?
Actually, the hairdryer would probably help. How many do I have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and there's 9 total.
Plug it in the bottom or below?
I usually plug it in behind.
So below? above the table or below the table?
I'm gonna plug it in above. Sorry.
Okay.
I was too busy selecting a nice variety of different skin tones. It's paying more attention to that. So on one of my favorite podcasts, they were talking about how with artists who record, you often have like a triangle of clean space, and then everything is just a disaster. Like everything just outside the camera is like a disaster zone, and I am most definitely guilty. That's kind of the problem of trying to use one space for everything, is makes it very difficult to keep it organized. I think the only olive green I have is olive green gold, which I think might be too glow in the dark for that to be a good fit. But that's just me. So World Watercolor Month prepared. And people keep asking if I'm excited to be getting married. I'm excited to be married. I'm not excited about all the work a bride is expected to do in order to get to the finish line. So I don't know if my camera's picking it up, but I can see it with like just looking at it, how much of the blue that's on their eyes is actually the non-photo blue where it got reactivated. So if you stretch it, that's going to activate the blue, and you can pick it up using a paper towel. So that's what I would recommend you do. If I stretched it, it would have to be on this big thing, and it'd be hanging all off the table, getting in the way. So I thought it was better that I didn't. You like me anyway. Aw, thank you. Have I used an underpainting for watercolor like when you're painting skin? Yes. And I actually really like underpaintings for darker skin tones because it allows me to, I like underpaintings for darker skin tones because it allows me to establish the shadows early on instead of trying to glaze that lighter purple wash on top of an already painted skin tone. So for some of these, I would definitely do underpainting. I'm going to start with this young lady here. So I will start with this person. Hopefully you guys can see them on the screen. And she's dry. The rest of them are not. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove my mic and mute it and use the hairdryer to help me out. Okay, so if I were mixing her base skin tone, I think definitely some Venetian red or Indian red, because she's got a really nice red. Maybe some burnt sienna. Definitely want to put in a little bit of alizarin crimson for sure. And I'm going to have to swatch too. And then I would start with some burnt umber. Okay, give me a sec. For a true test of the color, gotta rinse it out. Looks like maybe a little bit more burnt sienna. Something else you can do if you're mixing a lot of color or you need it to be very saturated from the get-go is use a synthetic brush for your mixing. Okay, so for her, for the base tone, I want to apply a little square. Hopefully that'll help me remember. Whenever I talk about dual recording, it always makes me think of the show Dual Survival. Okay, so that is burnt sienna. This is Indian red. A little bit of alizarin crimson. And it always takes all my willpower not to say a lizard rin. And then some burnt umber. So to begin with, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a little bit of underpainting. So I've got some alizarin crimson. And I apply it to her cheeks, her nose, and maybe under her nose. Might also want to do it along the top or the bridge of her nose, her eyelids. And also, please keep in mind, this is more like comic or how I paint Kara, right? How I paint the characters in 7-inch Kara and how I paint characters in general. So this isn't like realistic watercolor right now. This is very simplified watercolor. And it's, you know, based on what I think looks cute and what I think works best. So I really encourage you to experiment and play with it until you find one that works for you and that you like. This is just how I think about it and how I do it. And it's going to dry lighter. And then to do, that's too much because I'm going to have to wipe these out anyway. To do the shadows on her face after that dries, dioxine purple. Oh, so much. Such a brave choice there, Becca. Naphthalide maroon, which is like a really dark red. And that's going to give us a really nice kind of red violet. And I'm going to use that for the underpainting. So incoming hair dryer noises again. And I apologize. I'm going to have to do these one face at a time, which will probably take a while if I'm doing the skin tones and I'm doing the underglazes. So what I'll do is we'll go ahead and we'll test the skin tone. Because why not? I printed this. Might as well use it. So let's say you only want to do one layer. What I would recommend, and it depends on how dark the skin tone is generally you paint the shaded areas of the face. So you'll see this is a pretty popular technique for like manga artists. It's also a really good way to get a limited selection of colors and make it look like you've got more colors than you do because you're using the white of the paper. You can blend it out. I'm not going to. This is Canson really cheap, bulk 90-pound watercolor paper. It's not great paper. All right, hair dryer time. No problem, BJ. Wow, sorry, I have a candy in my mouth. Thank you, BJ. I really appreciate that. Yeah, it is very learnable. It took me a while. What helped the most was doing a lot of facial studies. Okay, so next I'm going to apply that reddish purple. And I'm using this just to kind of block in where the shadows would be. So like underneath the neck. Sometimes I'll do it under the nose, sometimes not, because sometimes it has an unfortunate side effect of not looking very attractive. So it kind of depends. Sometimes I'll just do it in the nostrils. The interiors of the ear, and where maybe the ear is overlapped in the front view by the face. Where the hair would cast a shadow onto the face. The eye sockets. And then maybe the contours of the face. It kind of depends on the character design and what I'm going for. And maybe tie those two in a little bit better. So you can do the domino mask, and it's going to make, I mean, we all have kind of the domino mask as a receding area on our face. With like, these are all fairly young headshots, so I would avoid doing the domino mask just because it can have a tendency to make the eyes look more recessed and can make the person look older than they are or more tired than they are. So it's a your mileage may vary sort of situation. Okay, so okay, why not use a flat surface for blending these? So usually when I'm painting characters like this, I'm painting a batch of pages. So I'm painting 4 pages all at the same time, all have the same characters in them, and I'm probably painting, let's say Kara, because she's one of the 2 main characters and she shows up the most. Kara is likely to be in every panel on the page, so I'm going to be mixing up a lot of her skin tone so I can paint it consistently across, like, let's say each page has 5 panels, about 20 little mini illustrations would make up a page. So that's one of the reasons I use the wells, is if I wanted to mix up that much paint, it would evaporate really quickly. So the wells also help preserve the mix so that I can come back to it like an hour later. So that's a really good question. Then you said, why, Joseph said, why go from the highlight colors to the shadows instead of highlight to midtone? It really depends. So what I'm doing, what I have found works best for me with darker skin tones. Your mileage might vary, and I often paint on sheet paper. I paint on Canson Montball for Kara. And this is learned the hard way painting Naomi and struggling and having to repaint her, is that if I'm doing like a lighter wash of blush or a lighter wash of the shadow color, it's good to establish it before I start painting her main colors, because when I'm painting Naomi's skin tone, it's a lot of semi-opaque colors, and they don't take multiple washes well, and they don't take glazes well. So for control, it's better if I establish those lighter shadow colors early than it is if I try to glaze those on top. Does that make sense? It does? Okay. Yeah, sorry. I always think of it as like my watercolor order of operations. And while I was answering that, it had a chance to dry. So unlike with that sample I showed you guys, I'm going to actually apply this all over because this is the lightest version of her skin tone. And keep in mind too, it's going to dry lighter as it dries because that's just watercolor. So this is going to end up being the highlight on her face. And hopefully you can kind of see how the shadow color makes sense once we've layered her actual base skin tone on top of it. I'm going to give that a chance to kind of sink in a little bit and dry a little bit before I pull out the hair dryer. Well, I have I should do it more often. Ooh, you can see the mess. Wow, BCam is having a fun time. I try to do watercolor portraits from reference at least once a year, like a series of them at least once a year, so that I can get better at understanding color and understanding light and how it affects the facial features. So even though I draw cartoony like 90% of the time, it is important to me to sometimes do realistic studies so that I can learn and continue to grow. Okay, so while she's drying, because I know it's getting getting later. Sure, we'll use this gentleman's skin tone. Okay, so this person has kind of a more yellowish undertone to their skin. So I'm gonna start with, we're gonna do maybe a yellow ochre burnt sienna and see how that works. It's not a bad skin color. And add a little more. And that's often what I do the first time I'm trying to mix up, or sometimes the first few times I'm trying to mix up a skin tone that I haven't mixed before, is swatch it and mix it and swatch it and mix it and swatch it and mix it. And again, it will dry lighter. So switch back over to the cheap seats.
Alvin asked if you've heard of the 100 heads in 10 days challenge.
I feel like I've heard it floating around, but I don't know that I've done it.
You should say what it is.
The 100 heads in 10 days challenge. I mean, that's 10 heads a day. That's not too bad. Seems like a good way to level up. What I'd been doing privately was, for like the past couple months, was I would draw people's likenesses from Humanae. Just as part of my drawing warm-up, because I'd like to get better at drawing likenesses, not in chibi form either. Sounds like fun though. Okay, so for this one, I'm going to apply my blush and shadow colors later on in the process. And I'm also going to try and leave some of the white of the paper still visible, although not a whole lot. Probably, maybe not. I mean, I don't normally do that for Carrie either. Well, if that's the case, then I'll go ahead and fill it. And seriously, like I'm narrating my thought process, but that's the sort of stuff I think about when I'm painting. So for me, it's important to be able to pay attention while I'm painting, which is sometimes difficult. So I'll leave just a little bit of the nose and then maybe some of the cheek. And unfortunately, the non-photo blue lines are reactivating, and they are going to affect the color. They're going to make it a little more olive than what I mixed. In this instance, it works. I probably could have afforded a little bitty bit of blue in there. had you going. I did not. My mistake. Okay. Let's mix up another skin tone. That way we'll have 3 going at one time, which will be nice. Oh, for this, I need to put what the mix was. So that was just like yellow ochre and burnt sienna. Okay, so their skin tone is very pale. There's a... Okay, give me a sec. There we go. Okay, so yellow ochre, and then I think maybe a little bit of that Quin red from earlier, because it's a very orange kind of Quin red. All right, let's swatch. Okay, so the lightness is good. It's gonna be so light when it dries. Yeah, cellulose paper is very, it basically just sits on the surface of the paper rather than soaking into the fibers itself and getting kind of trapped in there. Also, cellulose just tends to be very compressed. So what I'm doing, or what I'm trying to do, is I'm using this as kind of like a swatch sheet to make sure the base color I have mixed is a good fit, is actually a good skin tone and seems to work well over the majority of the face. But what I'm also doing is I'm also demonstrating different ways that you can utilize only a little bit of paint in order to get like maximum effect. So we're using mostly the white of the paper as the highlight. I've also found that watercolors that include a lot of optical brighteners, so like chalk or talc, they tend to be very prone to lifting and remixing when I try to glaze on top of them or add water to them. So this was the yellow ochre with a little bit of Quin red. Do any of you guys know if there's any way I could have like Microsoft Sam read the chat to me? I'm so sorry that I am not doing a great job keeping up with it. The part of my brain that is useful for reading is also the same part of the brain that is useful for me for drawing, because I can't do both at the same time, but I can listen. So I'm not ignoring you guys. I also don't want to be doing this until 12 o'clock at night. Also, sometimes as I'm painting faces, I'll kind of, especially if it's like my first time painting a character or painting a particular person's face, I'll kind of play around with where I'm going to leave, if I'm going to leave the white of the paper and where I'm going to leave the white of the paper. I'm using the gentleman in the Human A reference. I use it not only for color reference, but also like ideas on where to leave the white highlight. Since he's so pale, utilizing the paper itself is actually very helpful. Okay, so that is yellow ochre, and then a little bit of the Quin red. Okay, this gives me a chance to catch up. Sorry. Let me see. Just got 20 tubes of Van Gogh watercolors. Hopefully they are better for what I'm trying to do with comics, anime, landscapes. That's going to be a your mileage may vary situation. I actually really don't like Van Gogh watercolors. I think they have a lot of optical brighteners in them to make them look very bright and very brilliant in the pans. But for me, that makes them very muddy mixers, and they don't handle loads of layers well, and they don't handle glazing well. But if you want to go in and handle them almost like gouache, where you're only doing a couple of layers, I feel like they would handle much better for that. Also, yeah, cellulose paper is going to be more liftable. It's cheaper. You can run it through your printer to get the non-photo blue lines, which can help with the comic making process. That's what I use in my comic making process. You can also run cotton rag through your printer as well. But the blue lines are not as liftable if you're using cotton rag. It often stains the cotton rag. So that may be a reason not to use that. But cellulose and cotton rag tend to be very different animals when it comes to watercolor. They're both useful in watercolor, but they don't necessarily have the same uses. So you may want to experiment with both to see what you prefer more. Is cellulose good for illustrations? It really depends on what you want out of your finished art. So cellulose typically doesn't take as many layers. It doesn't play as well with wet into wet techniques. It can be very finicky. And then you also have to find a cellulose you really like, because not all cellulose papers are the same. So this is Canson XL watercolor paper. It's a cheap watercolor paper. I prefer Canson Montval cellulose paper. That's what I use for 7-inch Cara. It's not as easy to find. I have to order it from Dick Blick online, whereas XL, I can go down to Michael's, I can go to Plaza, I can go to Walmart and get XL if I want it. So it's again, a your mileage may vary situation. If I'm doing a more serious illustration, like a big standalone watercolor illustration, like this, I'll use cotton rag. But if I'm doing comic pages, I'll use Canson Montval, because I find that the Montval holds details better with really small panels, better than cotton rag papers do. But that's just my personal preference. That's just what I like. I was told that wet on wet for skin is a good idea to avoid harsh lines in between layers. If that is the aesthetic that you're going for. So it really depends on how you paint and how you like to paint. I do a lot of really thin layers of watercolor to build up that color, and then I will also sometimes blend out that prior layer, which doesn't always play as nice on cellulose paper. So I would say play with it. See if you like it. If you don't like it, try a different technique. I've talked about painting faces and painting people a lot on this channel, and I have some tutorials that are way more in depth in my process. So if you like how my style looks, you might want to take that. But if you don't, there are loads of other artists who handle it in loads of different ways. So my advice would be find an artist whose art kind of looks like what you're going for, at least in terms of how they're handling watercolor, and then see what they're doing and emulating that. I know some people here in the channel have used Van Gogh watercolor, and some may like it better than others. Let's see. I don't think anyone can read and draw at the same time. They'll take focus, yup, and we can only focus on one task at a time. Thank you, yes. And it looks like Speed Chat can read your chat, but requires granting allotted channel permissions. That's something to consider in the future. It would definitely mean Joseph doesn't have to read everything to me, which I know he would appreciate. And it would also mean that I could better keep up with the chat, which is really important to me. Because I feel like I'm ignoring y'all, and that's not what I want to do.
I read through terms of service. It sounds fine.
Okay, so this young lady up here has had a chance to dry. Also, normally I would say work with the largest brush you're comfortable with. That one is not the largest brush I'm comfortable with. And part of that is to kind of avoid, like, you know, when you're drawing something and you have those like little tiny scribbly strokes that look uncertain, you get the same thing with a watercolor brush that's too small for what you're trying to do. Ah, it's still wet. Ah, back on. No. So when I do the second layer, this is kind of when I decide if I want to start mixing my skin tone darker, or if I want to just allow it to evaporate and kind of become more saturated with time. And that's a technique that works better for watercolor comic pages where I'm painting like 6 pages at a time, because naturally that takes time to do. So it'll kind of evaporate over time. So also in general, especially, you see how the water is just kind of pooling on the paper? That's, hey, you don't really want that. You want to clean that up because it's going to leave variations in the skin tone, which, I mean, if you've worked that into your style, and I've seen some people who've done it and it looks so good, then it's fine, but it's not part of my style. So I need to kind of clean those up a bit. So what I'm going to do is I'll finish what I'm doing, and then I'm going to create a thirsty brush. You can also use a wet brush to soften some of those transitions so you get that softer, like wet into wet kind of blend. Thirsty brush, okay, dab it on your paper towel so you're removing most of the moisture. And then you're just barely dipping it in and using it to absorb any pooled and excess paint on your page. And wow, can I talk? Sorry. While I'm up here painting skin tone, I'll move over to the person next to them. Let me find my reference. Okay, there we go. So for this person, I may want to start adding more of the sienna and start building up more of that skin tone. And I apologize that I have the face cam on and I'm just leaning over the whole time. I need to be able to see what I'm doing, and if I'm sitting, I can't really get a good idea of how the face looks, because when you're sitting and your paper is flat, it skews the perspective. I mean, we've talked about this before. And also with watercolor, generally you do want to have it propped up by at least a couple inches, which I'm not doing today. But often when I'm recording watercolor tutorials, I do. And the reason for that is I've been told it results in less muddy sedimentation, like gravity is helping you out. Oh, another problem with cellulose paper is it dries way faster. So I'm already having problems with that where some of these areas have already dried. So I can't, they're gonna cause streaking. So I kind of wanted to blend some of this out here. Some of the color is not quite as even as I would like. All right, we'll have to see how that dries. And then this gentleman starts to have a little bit more kind of a pinkish cast. So I'll add a little bit more of the Quin red. I guess it's a Quin red. Maybe it's a Quin orange because cherry red's a Quin red.
Ryan Anthony asked multiple things.
Okay.
Things that I didn't know I answered.
Okay.
Is if Maria's gouache is any good?
Oh my goodness. I didn't know Marie's made gouache. I'm familiar with their Chinese watercolors, and I'm familiar with their Western watercolors, and I'm familiar with their premium Chinese watercolors, but I'm not familiar with their gouache. Maddie and Bomber B use gouache more than I do, so they might be able to better.
Specifically interested in white gouache.
White gouache? Oh, like for adding highlights back into things? I don't know. I'm not really hot on Marie's other than their premium watercolors, personally. So, it's just, I don't like how the colors handle in some of the field tests I've done. So, my favorite gouaches are probably like Winsor & Newton gouache or Utrecht gouache. That's one of Blick's house brands. Or M. Graham's white gouache is okay. Or, I mean, those are the ones I've used.
He also asked about Grumbacher mixed media sketchbooks.
I have never used one of the Grumbacher mixed media sketchbooks, and I have used a lot of different mixed media sketchbooks in my time. But it is not sold at Jerry's or Plaza or Michael's around here, so I don't have any experience with it, unfortunately. Yeah, the removable pages are nice. Canson XL makes a mixed media book that has removable pages. If you're doing watercolor, I would not necessarily recommend mixed media paper because even though it says it's mixed media, it's kind of like a jack of all trades, but not particularly good at any of those things. I'm sorry, I'm looking around because I have a mixed media, a Strathmore mixed media book I've been using, which it's okay, but like it isn't my preference for watercolor. If you're looking for cheap, hey Valerie, good evening. If you're looking for cheap watercolor paper, XL's fine. Strathmore's yeah, I'm not really hot on their cellulose paper. And if you can find Canson Montvale sketchbooks, those are pretty good too. And then Fluid Easy Block is decent. I feel like I'm missing something, but that's okay. Is there a medium that increases work time or a way to extend it with a spray bottle? Glycerin would, but the problem with glycerin is it starts to form kind of a resist where if you have too much glycerin on your paper, you won't be able to add additional layers on top of that. So your mileage may vary situation. Not using cellulose paper would be a good way to increase your work time because cotton rag papers tend to stay open a little bit longer. You could also consider putting a humidifier in your room. That's something Joseph and I have talked about doing because the winters in Nashville get really, really dry and it makes watercolor very difficult to do. And I am not super enjoying how we're getting like blossoming and sedimentation, but that's okay. This is just a demonstration. It's not. Okay, look. All right, we're gonna have a talk, Ryan. All right, it is not a waste. Using the materials to learn and to improve. It's not a waste. It's an investment in your future. You don't have to paint on like the most expensive watercolor paper. I'm not encouraging that, but you want to at least work on something that's going to handle similarly to what you eventually hope to paint on. So rather than mixed media paper, I would highly recommend just get like Canson XL paper. It's not the best paper, but it's very, very affordable. You can get the big pads, like the large size pads, and chop the pages down into something smaller and more workable. But I'm telling you, mixed media paper for watercolor is very finicky. It dries weird, it dries quicker, so it's not open as long. I mean, you may try it and you may love it. It may be perfect for you. And if that case, I'm really happy. But I really hope you aren't disappointed in how the paper performs and then blame yourself for that, because I teach a lot of people who are new to watercolor, and that's one of the things that breaks my heart is when they use inexpensive art supplies and then they blame themselves for how those supplies perform. Oh yeah, oh, you're welcome to ask questions here. I'll do my best. You're welcome to ask questions in the paint box, and that gives us more time to answer your questions. Ooh, thank you, Maddie. That's a good tip. Joseph's going to regret that, because I'm going to be in Luling, where I go to Walmart every day. Okay, so while these dry... Oh, man. Some people love B. Like, I know Allie loves B, and I hate B. Paper, not be the person. Love be the person, not the paper. All right, so for this kiddo here, let's do a darker skin tone. My goal tonight is to mix and demonstrate a range of different skin tones. So this is good practice for me because it allows me to try some different things. Okay, so for this gentleman, this one here, much like this young lady, we're gonna start with the shadow colors first. Also, if you're interested in learning more about watercolor, specifically watercolor for comics and for comic style illustrations, I do have 3 playlists here on this channel that would be really useful for that. I have Quick and Easy Watercolor, which is aimed at kind of covering things from the beginning. So if you're absolutely new to watercolor, that could be a great place to start. And I also have some like easy watercolor see, it already dried. Easy watercolor projects in that playlist, so that way you can get some hands-on experience. I also have my watercolor basics playlist, which is really all about painting watercolor comics, because that's where my heart is. And I also just have like a regular watercolor playlist, which also kind of includes my unbox and swatch watercolor reviews. Why did this dry so fast? And then over at natosoup.blogspot.com, I have written tutorials and reviews in my watercolor basics hub page. You can find that linked on the top of the page. But I've spent, what, Joseph, like the past 4 years recording watercolor tutorials and reviews to help people who specifically want to make like watercolor comics. So I would really recommend checking that out.
I linked all that.
Thank you. All right, so this guy. I do want to kind of soften the transition here on his face. Unfortunately, it started to dry in some areas, and that's just one of the frustrations of using cellulose paper. And then I'm going to want to start mixing the base color. So when I have my swatch paper handy, and I see y'all are talking about image transfer, I want to get in on that in a minute myself. So, okay, he's got a lot of red in his skin tone, so I'm going to grab some alizarin crimson and maybe some of that naphthalide maroon. And I'm going to go ahead and pre-activate my Van Dyke Brown and my sepia, but I'm also going to grab some of our burnt umber. And a little bit of Van Dyke Brown. And some of our sepia. Okay, so we can definitely add some more sepia. And I'm going to want to wash my brush because that sepia was originally from a tube and sometimes it picks up weird particle chunks. So I want an accurate representation of the color. Not much different. Not even watching where I'm going, trying to read the chat. Ah, thank you, Jill. So sepia and a little bit of Van Dyke Brown. It was time for a revamp. There we go. This is more the direction I want it to go. And that's still wet. So what I'm going to do while I wait for that to dry is I'm going to create our base color palette so that I can reference it and know what I use to mix that skin tone. And these are, when I'm, again, these colors, these are just my preferences. Different people can arrive at equally valid and good solutions with very different colors or very different types of colors. Like they may want to use gouache and just water it down a whole lot. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's still a really valid way to approach it. Okay, so for the blush, I'm going to use a little bit of naphthalide maroon.
Brian said he's just afraid of working on Canson XL for drawing since he sketches with a heavy hand.
Oh, I feel that.
Most of his art.
Oh, man, I get you. I do.
Specify what you get.
I get the feeling of I'm heavy-handed also, and then in order to draw something I do like, I have to do so much underdrawing that it makes it very difficult to use that same drawing, if that makes sense. So what I do, there's a few techniques. I think Maddie probably mentioned one of them, but I'm gonna revisit that as well. So one of them is doing a graphite transfer, and what you can do with that is you can apply graphite using like a graphite stick all over the back of your drawing. Yeah, and then basically redraw it onto your preferred paper.
Maddie said the first thing they did when the lockdown was lifted in their town was go to our supply store and buy some watercolor brushes and some paper for the sketchbook.
I'm smiling because I did the same thing. I was in New Orleans because my mom was having surgery. I did the same thing as Maddie did, i.e. hit up the art supply store. I was in Louisiana because my mom was having surgery, and I went to David's Art Supply and bought a bunch of stuff.
Omar Comics said Strathmore makes good cotton paper. Brian Anthony says, I'm currently really struggling with shadows and highlights when it comes to my own characters or landscapes, especially mountains. And earlier he specified he does comics, landscapes, and something else. Can't remember what.
I saw that. That's why I keep going back to like the watercolor comics notion, is because we've got that in common.
I don't know if you saw, but Maddie says they love the shadows you made for the skin tone. I think that was a few skin tones ago, though. The guy with the purple.
Oh, sure.
And they said also this naphthol something maroon.
Yeah.
Is it PR209?
I'd have to go dig up the tube, but I can ask me that in the paint box.
Say what that is.
Regarding naphthalide maroon, it's a Daniel Smith color. It could be naphthol. I might be like totally misremembering the name. But I know who made it. It's a Daniel Smith, and I can look it up and tell you in the paint box. Just ask me again so I can remember. And
Jill was all said Daniel Smith. Naoto or naphthalide maroon is a PR171.
the rest, wait. Hang on a sec, sorry. Brain is being weird. Okay, so before I start this row of kids, I want to work on the third layer for this row of kids. And for her, I need to A, bring back up my reference, and B, I know I wanted to go darker with her skin. There we go. Okay, so this was our color. Here are my swatches. So I definitely want to add more burnt sienna, and then also start moving towards Van Dyke brown. I know my hand is kind of occluding what's going on. These cheap plastic palettes are so light, you got to hold them down when you're mixing. So usually when I'm swatching like layers of skin color, I'll try to find the exact swatch and swatch on top of it, and that helps me see how it's going to layer later on. The wrong one. And usually after about 3 layers, I try to start working back in the blush, and I may start working in shadow colors, kind of depending on what's going on that page. I do have a tendency to do probably too many layers, so keep that in mind. If you think my work has too many layers, you know, play around, adjust, find a happy medium for you. Also wanna, before the night ends, of course, I wanna thank you guys for hanging out with me and painting with me this Saturday night. Whether you're staying at home due to quarantine or you just wanted to come hang out with me, I always appreciate it. Definitely gives me something to look forward to. It also helps give my week a rhythm, you know what I mean? Like, so that not every day is the same day. So one of the things I also want to point out is I'm losing some of the details right now. So what I would normally do is later on, much further along, I would do wet over dry, or no, dry over dry, where you have very, very little water on your brush. So you get a really, really thick, concentrated version of the color. And I would use that to add details so that we can kind of pull, like her nose gets kind of lost. So I would do that later on just to kind of pull those details back in. Now what I don't love is how we have, and this is on me, I used the cellulose paper, so this is my fault, but that's also why I'm beating that drum, is if you don't like the streakiness, that is because of the cellulose, aka wood pulp. Man, I wish my phone would tell me when it was not recording anymore. It makes editing these so much fun. Also want to be able to read the chat. Okay, so then for the person next to them, I want to start, that's this one here, and that's a very burnt sienna forward kind of skin tone, so I'll add a little bit more in there. But I also think we're at the point where we can start doing some of the blush. So I'm going to use, I really want to do a mix of alizarin crimson with a little bit of scarlet, and then water that down a lot. And then underneath the nose. Handling the blush a little bit different for this kid. Inside of the ears. Tops of the eyes. Maybe add a little bit more back, wet into wet, kind of on the apples of the cheeks. And then underneath the neck. Basically, where skin crosses over skin is a good place to add a little bit of blush just to kind of add some liveliness. And then, all right. So, let's see. Maybe go a little bit darker, or maybe even, if you're brave, even go in with a little bit of Queen Gold.
How many of these were you hoping to finish tonight?
I will probably not get all 9 finished in the stream, so that's where the beautiful thing about recording comes in, is I can always finish like tomorrow or work on it more tomorrow and hopefully get all 9 done for like the tutorial version. I'm grateful though, because this has been drawing decently fast. But you know, I'm also doing more than I kind of thought I would. I'm not complaining, I'm just saying, like, because I think originally I was just going to demonstrate the base skin tone for each person. Whereas now I'm doing like a couple of layers and some blush. Yes, 10 though. Or I may, in the stream, I want to at least start working on this guy and get her blush more established. And just work on it quietly off stream while recording. Because I think I could get it done quicker like that. I mean, you know, y'all know how that is. Yes, theoretically I could get it done quicker. Let's see. Okay, so that's dried. I can actually go in. Wonder if this one has. Not quite. We also have some harsh lines there, so what I want to do is I want to not put my hand in the other girl's face, but just soften them a little bit. So BJ said, I look forward to our Saturday nights. Tonight was really cool. Yeah, I think so too. I love painting with you guys. Even, ooh, I gotta be careful not to run my hand into her wet face. Even though watercolor presents some unique time challenges because it takes so long to dry, I like painting with y'all. And I am resting my wrist on my hand because it's kind of like a movable maul stick. Not that maul sticks aren't movable, but like a bridge, right? So my hand isn't resting directly on the paper. My ability to hover is not super great, so this gives me a little bit more control than if I were trying to hover. And it also means I'm not dragging my hand in the paper. I feel like I'm painting like a class of kids. I think that's what I've been thinking along the whole time, is like, I'm painting a class. You know,
which one is teacher's pet?
Oh my god. Maybe this little girl with the butterfly clips. She looks like she always does her homework. Now I'm like, which one's baby back? None of them, actually, surprisingly. Probably because I was like, I'm not going to draw myself.
Which one is way too into anime?
All of them. Come on, it's my class.
Brian said the biggest thing I did to overcome all this flat wash or loose watercolor background, and then
Uh-huh.
on top
Oh, that's
of it,
cool. Yeah.
and add white gouache for highlights. Allows me to paint without thinking, and then use it as a toned paper. He puts in quotes for drawing.
No, I mean, it is toned, but that's, man, I wish I had that courage. I would love, like, some of my favorite mangaka do something similar to that, and I love how it looks, and I'm too chicken to do it because I don't like how I draw.
He says he got his flat washes perfected that way. And Allie says she does that in her sketchbooks sometimes.
Yeah. And I'm going to use a little bit of alizarin crimson for...
Matt said the color was PR206.
For what? For what?
I think the color that...
The naphtha something?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, you're saying a lizard crimson?
No, it's not a lizard crimson. A lizard wren. So this is the Quinn something. It's a Turner color. It's like Quinn brown or Quinn red. Oh, it's Quinn Sienna. No, it really is Quinn Sienna. I just remember. Remembering that it was a Turner color helped me remember the actual color.
They all have naming schemes, right?
What do you mean by naming? I mean, like, I don't know. What? Well,
They don't just
yeah.
make up names without a system, right?
Sometimes they do, which is why I was like, I don't know, because like, nuts. I added water in.
Makeup industry where they will literally just make up names.
It depends on the brand. Yeah, the Quinn Sienna is actually really pretty as like a skin tone. It's working really well as a blush for this little girl. I wasn't sure how well it would work, but it's working really well. And my camera stopped again. Yeah. Let's get this dude's skin tone down though. When I layer the same color over itself to get it darker and more deep, do you have to adjust the water ratio or can it just be the same light wash? That is an excellent question, and it really kind of depends on, like, I'm talking about skin tones today, so it really kind of depends on the skin tone. So for like really, really light skin tones, I can often do the same skin tone over and over and over again without adding more paint to it. But that's not always the case because for me, I want to build up contrast as I paint. Which is sometimes something I really struggle with, as you probably can tell here. And I usually let time evaporate some of the water for me, so that helps with building up contrast. But since I'm trying to paint this relatively quickly for you guys, I'm going to have to remix things in order to get them darker, which requires more swatching. So if you just allow the paint to evaporate some as you go, and if you don't work in a well like this, if you work in like a larger mixing area, it's going to evaporate more quickly since it's more spread out. There's more surface area. More water can evaporate into the atmosphere. But when you work with wells like this, which are great for painting in batch or mixing up a lot of the paint so you have a consistent color, you do typically need to remix it or mix it darker as you go. But like in between painting sessions, I'm not going to like dump these paints. I'm going to use them in their more evaporated, more concentrated form if I were to add additional layers or additional details. Okay, so let's go back to our young lady at the top. So I have alizarin crimson, and it's mixed a bit more saturated now. So by applying the blush and the shadow color early on, I can do a really light glaze, and then when I go in now, I can just build up on that because that color is already there in the base. Because especially like on these cellulose papers, if I do too much glazing, which is just like a very light wash of the color to influence the color underneath, it's going to start to lift that color up, which you can kind of see it happening already. I'm not that concerned about it though. Gotta fix that kid's mouth. It's like she ate a popsicle and the popsicle went out of control. We may have found the baby back, the one who is wearing her food on her face.
Experimenting with makeup.
Yes, that was still baby back. I might not wear makeup now, but I did when I was younger. Okay, what color did I use? I think it was an alizarin crimson for her as well. And with him, it dried really desaturated. So all those purple undertones and even the skin tone itself dried kind of chalky compared to what we had. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to let it fully dry, and I'm going to try to remix the color a little bit darker. So more Van Dyke brown and more sepia, and hopefully we can better recreate our reference gentleman. Okay, we'll have to see how that dries. So I'm going to let these dry a little bit, and that'll give me kind of a chance to get caught up with the chat. And Kino Kitsune replied to Brian's question about layering color. It depends on the paper and the paint, to be honest. Yeah, I would say paper, paint, and time. How much? So all three of those factors are going to depend on whether or not you're going to need to remix it or whether you can just let it evaporate. So Brian said, I'm going to get some sort of wells for my watercolor since the typical 12 pan sets are too small for me to mix my washes and colors without them blending. Yeah. So you can get these sort of really cheap Daisy Weld palettes. You can get these at like Walmart. You can get the little 6-weld ones at Dollar Tree. So they're around and they're really cheap. Calvin says, that looks a lot like Zombie. Unfortunately, right now, yes. The colors dried way more chalky than I wanted them to, which is why, wow, Joseph, you didn't need to contribute to that. Thank you. Joseph said, it's a mix of the pockmark painting. Wait, no, sorry. Mix of the pockmark look in the eyes. I think when she's done, it'll look more natural. Yeah. When I'm doing, I mean, like, for example here, and that's also partially the paper, I'm having some lifting problems, I'm having some chalkiness drying issues. I mean, what is it when you're doing something live, anything that can go wrong will go wrong, so I just roll with it. I mean, what's cool with this is you may notice you have some of the same problems, so me having these problems and us talking about them and acknowledging them and talking about solutions may give you the tool set you need later for yours. But no, I'm not super happy with how chalky his skin dried, but I am hoping that further layers we can do the reference gentleman way better justice. Brian said, I've also been working my painting on a 4.5 by 6 piece of paper, which might be too small for the detail I need. I'm just nodding because it's like, I do the same thing. I work too small. And like some of my favorite artists, when you look at the full piece, it's huge, right? So I get it. And BJ says, yes, thighs. Yes, thighs. Calvin said, add some blood red and add some green glaze and turn it into a zombie. And Ms. Bucci2 said, I wish I caught this live from the beginning. I think you're doing well. Well, thank you very much. So one of the nice things about this is I'm recording it with this in addition to streaming it. I'm also recording it with my funicular divicular. So what I would like to do off stream is I'd like to do all 9 of these kids and maybe fix some of the areas where like I need to fix her lips. Because we have some issues there with how we have some slippage, we have some liftage, yeah, which is not, I mean, the reference woman is beautiful, and I wanted her to be a really cute little girl, so we gotta fix the slippage. And that gives me some time, so, and also like, this is a live demonstration. I know it's not gonna be perfect. All right, let's try to do our friend here some justice. Let's try to fix what I hath goofed. Hopefully. I mean, it may just decide not to. Which, in that case, I will firmly blame the Canson XL. Because I want y'all to note the colors I'm putting down are not like gray-brown at all. They're really nice colors. But you know what? Sometimes that happens. Like I usually say when stuff goes pear-shaped when I'm recording, it's good when I make mistakes because people make mistakes in art all the time. I think a lot of people, when they share their art online, they try to cut that out because we just want to like represent ourselves with only the most positive examples, right? Which, like, as someone looking for work, that's understandable. But as somebody who is trying to show other people that they can do these things too, you know, you need to see the failures and the problems in order to see the successes and the solutions. Okay, so I'm adding some naphthalide something, maroon, and some alizarin crimson. And we're gonna try and fix the blush on this kiddo. I think my problem was it was too light a glaze on a paper that doesn't really take light washes very well. Yeah, well, it isn't just that it's cellulose, because Canson Montval is cellulose, and it handles a little bit better. Like, some people really don't like Montval, so don't take me praising Montval to be like, you have to buy Canson Montval, it's the best cellulose paper. It's whatever works for you, works for you. But the cellulose doesn't help. It's also the cheap, like, it's Canson's cheap paper. They say it's student paper, but, you know, sometimes I love it and sometimes I don't. I've done some really nice things on it, and I've also painted a little boy who looked like a zombie there for a minute, but I think we may have resuscitated him. Someone describe washi tape to me. Is it just decorative masking tape that YouTubers use to add a nice border? Not necessarily. So washi tape can be, this is a washi tape, okay? They come in lots of different colors. It's a low tack paper tape, very unlikely to tear up your paper. So you may use it to tape it down to hold your paper in place while you're painting on it to prevent it from stretching or buckling. It's definitely cuter than, hey, can you grab the blue painter's tape for me? We have used it to hold Bowie's toy in place, but I need it to show folks. Okay, so that's washi tape. Thank you. This is oh really? Probably. This is low tack blue painter's tape. So it's a crepe tape, and you want the crepe tape, not the foam tape, because the foam tape, I don't know why I'm standing. The foam tape will tear your paper. I've tried it. It will ruin it. This is low tack. And what I do is I actually put it on my arm so that the dead skin cells can remove even more of the adhesiveness before I stretch my watercolor paintings with it. Hey, could you grab me one of my watercolor paintings so I can show them? This is artist tape, masking tape. This is more likely to tear it. So the proof is in the use, and that is some cotton rag paper, probably Arches, taped down with the blue painter's tape in order to hold it tight while I paint it so it doesn't buckle and warp and cockle and turn into a hot disaster piece. So washi tape is not, if you want to really saturate it, it's not going to hold up. It's just not adhesive enough. The blue masking tape is going to do a much better job. But it's not as cute. What paints? Oh. Canson XL is one-sided. It's more textured on one side, correct? Yes. So most cellulose papers, they're not woven. They're not mold made. It would be like Bristol, except it's got a texture on it, and it may have some exterior sizing in order to provide a ground for the watercolor to actually sit on. So you could try painting on the other side and report back. I mean, I've never tried it because I really like the watercolor paper texture. Now, some cotton rag papers are double-sided, like Canson's Moulin de Roy. Maddie told me it's double-sided. I haven't tried it yet, but I trust her.
I thought sizing was only applied to one side.
Sizing is an interesting conundrum that I've gotten into fights with people over. Someone had the gall to tell me that by stretching my watercolor paper, I was removing all the sizing and ruining it. And it was like, you're removing some. But I was like, girl, we went to the same school. I know you know better. But anyway, so sizing internally, when you stretch your paper, if you soak your paper, you're not likely to remove it. If you use hot water, you can reactivate the sizing, because sizing is often like gelatin or animal-based sizing, so it tends to be soluble in warm water. It can be internal, it can be external, like on the surface of the paper. So if you've noticed, your watercolor paper has kind of a soapy texture, like Winsor & Newton's old watercolor paper, the first watercolor paper, had a lot of external sizing that made it very soapy to paint on. I liked it. A lot of people hated it. But sizing is just used to give structure to the paper. What do I think of Fabriano Studio? I like Fabriano Studio not for watercolor. I like it for inking. I like the texture. It plays really well with brush pens. Not brush pens, brushes. For watercolor, I really try to limit how many layers I use on it because it does not like layers. It's weird. That 25% cotton makes it weird. You can pre-wet and or wash sizing in Canson XL paper to improve absorption and reduce the floating on paper effects. That could be true. I don't know one way or the other. I have used it both in sketchbook form, just straight like this, and I've also stretched it, and you know, when you stretch it, you're washing it. And I haven't noticed an appreciable difference, but that doesn't mean there isn't one. It just means I haven't noticed it. There's a lot of environmental factors that can affect how watercolor handles, so your mileage may vary. And I think Kino Kitsune has tried painting on both sides of Stonehenge aqua cold press or hot press, Kitsune, and you liked it well enough. Okay, so for this young gentleman, I think we have fixed some of the zombification, so I'm happy about that because I felt bad about it. So what I'm going to do now is, instead of trying to mix it in this where we have a lot of water and we have a lot of pigment, I'm going to take some of it because I want to mix a really dark version of the color to kind of highlight his cheekbones and stuff. Or you could just use like straight from the pan if you really want to. And somebody asked about paints earlier. I'll answer because it's my stream and I do what I want. I use all sorts of different paints because I've reviewed a bunch of different paints on this channel, and I have favorite colors from lots of different brands. So one of the plus sides to having purchased and reviewed so many watercolors over the years is that I can cherry pick my favorites. So I don't have to be brand loyal because it's not like they're paying for this. So I used to use a lot of Winsor Newton because it's professional grade and you can get it almost anywhere. So you can get it at Blick, or you can get it at Jackson's, or you can get it at Cheap Joe's, or etc, etc, etc. Shoot, you can get it at Michael's. I don't use so much Winsor Newton anymore because I kind of feel like, yeah, that's going to work. So we got a much more saturated, ooh, that's such a pretty color, much more saturated version of the color. So I feel like it doesn't perform as well as some of the other professional brands that are out there. I also think it's kind of expensive for how quickly I run through it. So I use a lot I still use a lot of Winsor Newton, especially for skin tone, or colors I mix skin tones with, because their colors tend to be very finely milled. But I use a lot of Core. I use a lot of Daniel Smith. I use a lot of Holbein. I really like Holbein. It's expensive in the US though. I use a lot of, I use my Da Vinci palette frequently, even though it's not in my daily driver palette. I really highly recommend it as a brand. Really quality watercolors. Let's see, what else? Recently I reviewed, although the review isn't live, Shinhan PWC watercolors, and for the price, I really like them. They are great. I really like Magello Mission Gold, but I can't find it in stores, and if I can't find a watercolor in stores, it's unlikely to make it into my daily driver palette. Ooh, I don't know about this. This might be too dark. Sennelier is great. They use honey as their binder. M. Grams are really nice, although also one of those that I can't always find everywhere. So my paint box, just like my Discord paint box, is a mixture. All kinds of artists, all kinds of paints. I have. I have used and reviewed Hydrus, which I like pretty well. Although to be real, when I'm watercoloring, I never think, oh, I should use Hydrus. You know, I am the most comfortable with using watercolors from half pans, even if that means I'm drawing my tube watercolors in half pans for ease of use. So that's a disclaimer. And I've also used the Radiant watercolors, which are dye-based watercolors, and I don't like those nearly as much. Aw, kiddo. I don't know. I feel like...
There you go.
I know. Well, the thing is, the reference gentleman has some facial hair, which is skewing
I think he
where
has some head hair too.
he
Right?
does, yeah. But it's skewing how my brain is reading shadows.
Yeah.
I don't know. This might be okay.
Because he
Now
has
that I've
almost an outline of hair.
right, and I think at first I thought that was the shadows on his head, like I thought he had a shaved head. But that's why working from references.
He might have a shaved head.
No, that's hair. Now that I've like had a good chance to look at it,
Yeah,
that's
I
on
was
me.
pretty sure initially it wasn't, but now that I'm looking at it more, like it blends in so well with his beard that I'm reluctant to say he doesn't have hair.
Yeah, I think it, and you guys also have to keep in mind that the camera I'm using desaturates things pretty badly, and I adjusted so that you guys could actually see the pencil line art rather than color accuracy. So some of these colors are going to look different in real life than what the camera is capturing. I don't have an in-person Jackson's. Otherwise, so the way I acquire watercolor like a magpie or a crow is I'm like, hey Joseph, let's go to Plaza. Hey Joseph, let's go to Jerry's. And he's like, okay. And so we go. And then I'm like, I need watercolor because I don't have a lot of watercolor. And I basically buy like a tube or two that look interesting in their colors I might not have. And then Allie showed me how to make one of these, and it's been really great. So it's sorted by brand, and then within brand, it's sorted by color. So I don't order a lot of watercolors online. I don't know, I just don't, unless I'm like buying a color I love and have run out of. I'm not super into the PH Martin Radiant watercolors myself, but like Nashi Art uses them and is so good with them, and I'm so jealous of them. So yeah, so your mileage may vary. Oh. Yeah, the paint box, we tend to get real nerdy about this stuff. I'm trying to find, where's the lady I was painting? There she is. Okay. Because I want to add, I think I can go in and start doing the facial shadows on her, and at least that then I can like demonstrate what I'm talking about. Okay, so I'm just mixing some more dioxine purple in a thicker concentration with our naphthol / naphthamide / I don't know, maroon. I'm going to try to avoid the wet areas on his face. So since this is a shadow color, I mostly want to use this to indicate cast shadows, and I probably could have gone darker with it. But this will give you guys kind of an idea of where I generally put shadows. So usually if I'm painting younger people, I try not to put too many shadows on their face. But it can also be really helpful for adding some definition. Unfortunately, what it also does is it can zombificate people. So you want to be kind of careful, which is why when I'm doing shadows on like Naomi, I'll do them in kind of the third stage. So before I add the really, really dark skin tone shadows, I'll go ahead and I'll do a layer of the purple shadows, let it dry, and then I can go in and do the skin tone shadows. So while I'm talking about shadows, I want to do the shadows on her and on her. And it's probably time for some clean water, but I'm lazy. So depending on the skin tone, I will use like a mauve. I always said mauve, but my mom's really gotten on my case. It's mauve, Becca. You're supposed to be an artist. Like, there's regional dialectical differences. Anyway, it's just kind of like a, let me swatch it for y'all so you can see. It's just kind of like a hoo boy kind of almost purple. Then a little naphthalide maroon. So we get this really nice red violet. And depending on the skin tone, you may want to add a little bitty bit of doxine purple if you're brave or foolish like me. I'm also referencing the skin tone reference. So what these shadow colors do is they desaturate and they recess. They push the local color back into the background, which is why they're great for implying like there's hair in front of the face. So when I'm painting portraits from reference, what I find I end up using a lot of is like Payne's gray and neutral tint to add shadows. But when I'm doing cute, more stylized art, I try to stay away from it because it tends to desaturate what I'm doing so much. Man, sorry, I get my hand in the paint and then it gets everywhere. What I'm trying to do is just a little bit of the curve of the cheekbone. And then, painting my monitor. Let's do the girl right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go more naphthalide maroon with just a little bit of the mauve color. So we'll go lighter. So like that. Also, something I've noticed when I'm painting Cara pages is when I paint the skin and I do the shadows and all that, it looks really weird until I paint in the hair, and then the hair kind of helps finish it and adds more contrast to it and it ties together. So I know this looks probably pretty strange, but it's all part of a larger process. And then for him, I think just adding in a little bit of stronger blush color at his cheeks at least will kind of help this make a little bit more sense. Thank you, Maddie. I hope you have a good evening. If you're still in here, if I haven't completely missed you. Yeah, the art critique and improvement, and just be specific in what you're looking for in terms of critique, and that way we can help the most. It's difficult when people sometimes just pop stuff in there and we've never seen their art before. We're not really sure what direction they want to take their art in. So if you have specific questions like, hey, I didn't like how I drew this hand, do you have any recommendations? That's really helpful. Also, if you would like a draw over or a red line, you can request that, and if I have the time, I'll do it. Some other artists may be interested in doing it, but there's no guarantee. But you have to specifically ask for that. We had a chatter, he no longer chats with us, but he got really frustrated because we don't just critique his work like every time he posts it. And it's like, well, dude, you didn't let us know you wanted critique. And we do have a rule against unsolicited crits. So just to kind of keep it friendly and to prevent harsh feelings. Because sometimes you worked really hard on something and you know it's not perfect, but you just want to show it to people and you're not looking for critique. More tubes than pans, actually, but that may just be because the color she wants isn't in pans. Yes, I definitely end up filling. Also, I have found for me personally, buying a tube of watercolor and filling pans and letting it dry is more economical for how I paint. I go through half pans pretty quickly. In fact, that's when I used to buy Winsor & Newton specifically because they had the half pans, and the half pans were sold at most places. And that was stupid expensive because I was paying like $10 a half pan even for series 1. Whereas with tubes of watercolor, you can pay like $6 and you can get 3 fillings out of it. Which do I prefer, pan or tube watercolor? I like my tube watercolors and pans. So a little A, a little B. But mostly when I'm shopping, I'm looking at tubes of watercolor because it's more economical for me. Well, also it is getting late, so what I'm going to do for the stream is I'm going to do one more layer on her, and sometimes I'll borrow colors from other characters that have been pre-mixed because I mean they're mixed, the pigments are already there, so I'll swatch it like this to see how I like it. Seems like it works okay. So I'll use that for the final details on her. And then I'll wrap up the stream and work on the rest of these kids off stream. So something else you guys might notice if you're looking really closely, I don't know how well the camera can catch it, is sometimes with, this is particularly true of inexpensive cellulose papers, but sometimes cotton rag papers do it as well. I will have built up so many layers of color, that it acts like a watercolor ground and it will spider the colors into other areas. What happened to your mouth there? So that's one of the downsides of having like 1 million layers of color. The other is it just takes me so long to paint things. But I also like if you look at finished pages from chapter 7 and chapter 8, I really like how I'm able to get this really soft sort of storybook kind of feel with my watercolor. So there are pros and there are cons. And then, off stream, after say I painted her eyes and I painted her hair, I would go in with a really thick mix and like redelineate her ears and maybe outline her face, etc. Just to kind of tie it together a little bit better. Because right now I know it reads as very messy. And now she looks like she's got crazy, scary eye makeup on. Okay, so I think that is about it for tonight. You guys saw, wow, can I talk? You guys saw how long it took me to get through 4 faces, so you can imagine if I were to do the other 5, we'd be here all night. I'm going to record the rest of this and edit it together into a time-lapse tutorial, so hopefully that will be helpful, and I'll do the rest of them. And maybe I'll even do their hair and their eye colors on that. I also want to point out that my wonderful, amazing, fantastic, and very generous art nerds over on Patreon, patreon.com/nattosoup, Nattosoup, get all of my tutorials before everybody else, often by several months in advance. I'm not saying this one is going to take several months to go out, but there is kind of a delay time between when I make something and edit it and when it actually goes live on YouTube. So if you want to see the rest of this tutorial soon, one of the ways you can do that is by supporting the work that I do over on Patreon. If you guys want to see more of my watercolor work, the whole inspiration between all of my watercolor tutorials and all the watercolor outreach that I do, 7-inch Kara, you can read the first 6 chapters for free at 7inchkara.com. I want to thank you guys, of course, so much for joining me this evening. I had a lot of fun. I really enjoyed painting with you guys, and I really appreciate your patience, especially as we unzombified this guy here. I think he appreciates it. But I particularly want to thank Joseph for generously spending his evening helping out with the stream. I don't thank him enough for helping with the stream, but I really do appreciate it. And I also want to thank Kitsune for helping out as well as Maddie, who I know has already hit the hay, and Calvin, who's still in here, for helping and for answering watercolor questions as well. Kino Kitsune, Ali, Maddie, and Calvin are also watercolor artists, and we all handle our watercolor very differently. So if you're ever interested in another opinion, that they may have some insight that I might lack, particularly in terms of gouache. I do not use gouache. Anyway, I hope you guys have a wonderful evening. I hope you guys stay safe. I hope you guys stay healthy. And I'll probably see you guys next Saturday. I don't know, because I'm teaching the Paper Child workshop. Let me actually show you guys what I've been working on. I'm teaching a Zoom version of the Paper Child workshop. So these were colored with Crayola pencils and Crayola markers every day next week, Monday through Friday. So I have no idea how much energy I will have, or how much time I will have, or how many ideas I will have for next Saturday. But if you are curious if we're having a stream on Saturday night, you can check the community tab, usually around Friday or Thursday. I usually start talking about the stream over on the community tab by then. So thank you guys so much, and hopefully I'll see you guys next week.